So good evening, everyone. My name is Catherine Dussault, and today I'll be presenting on the Old Iron Portrait series, specifically on the background, condition, and conservation treatment of one member of that series, the portrait I Am Coope by Catherine Frances Clausen. The painting is part of 28 surviving canvases from the series belonging to the collection of the Braintree District Museum in Braintree, Essex. And due to issues relating to the painting's condition, the portrait was brought to the Courtauld Institute of Art in London for treatment in 2022, where it became part of the studio projects I completed there during my postgraduate studies. Today, I'll be taking you all through the conservation treatment that was performed, starting with some art historical and social background that led to the portrait's creation, a review of the degradation processes that led to the necessity for interventive treatment, and the preparation, execution, and results of that treatment. The Old Iron series is comprised of a number of portraits, thought to be 48 originally, commissioned in the 1920s by the Crittall Window Company of a selection of their employees. A printed catalog of the portrait series was also produced following the set's completion, examples from which are pictured here. The Crittall Window Company began in Braintree as an ironmongery in 1849, founded and led by members of the Crittall family. The company found a boom in success after procuring the patent for a steel-framed window design and expanded to global operations by the 1930s. After pivoting to munitions production during World War I, the company was commissioned by the UK government to create windows for a government housing scheme, leading to further company expansion. Notable buildings in England with Crittall windows include the Tower of London, Tower Bridge, and the Houses of Parliament. As a company, Crittall operated with a particular emphasis on employee life and well-being. In 1926, the company broke ground in Essex for the building of Silver End, a model village alongside their factory location, designed to provide employees with homes and community infrastructure, which included sports and medical facilities, department stores, and social venues such as a central community hall, seen pictured here in a postcard on the left. The Old Iron portraits were commissioned to celebrate the opening of Silver End and were once featured on display at the Silver End Village Hall. 48 portraits of 47 named sitters, with one sitter painted twice, are known to have been painted for the project. The employees selected included individuals from all subsets of company life, including factory workers, company managers, office staff, and members of the Crittall family. The title Old Iron for the series has unclear origins, though is possibly intended as a tongue-in-cheek reference to the scrap metal trade and the rag and bone men's calls for any old iron. Many of the sitters are depicted with objects emphasizing the role of employment, including paperwork, the latest technology, and other tools of the trade. Only 10 of the portraits depict subjects against location-specific backgrounds, while the remainder feature backgrounds of flat color. Though the majority of the collection are painted in half length, there is variability across the set in terms of canvas dimensions, compositional formatting, and style, though this is perhaps not unexpected for a series executed by numerous individual artists. 25 artists participated in the project, who, according to the Old Iron Portrait Catalog, were chosen by a committee of nominators affiliated with London Schools for the Visual Arts, Royal Academician Sir George Clausen, and Professors Russell, Rothenstein, and Tonks of the RA, Royal College of Art, and Slade School, respectively. Research into the participating artists revealed that they had each been a student of one or more of those schools, and the majority were actively enrolled or recently graduated at the time of the Crittall Commission. The decision of the Crittall Company to celebrate the efforts of their workforce through the medium of art was likely spurred by the personal sentiments of members of the Crittall family, who were known lovers and collectors of visual art and who included several artists amongst their ranks. This included Walter Francis Crittall, a trained painter, who began a friendship with Sir George Clausen after the latter's move to Essex in the 1910s, with local accounts of the two neighbors participating in shared painting expeditions and holidays. In addition to their artistic pursuits, Clausen and Crittall shared similar sentiments towards social movements, particularly those arguing improved rights and conditions for members of the working class. These concerns also connected the Crittall and the Courtauld families in Essex, likely spurring their joint participation in a program called Art for the People, in which works of art from major collections were loaned to communities that did not have their own public art. In 1935, Samuel Courtauld, the founder of the Courtauld Gallery, loaned his Peach Trees in Blossom by Vincent van Gogh for viewing at the Village Hall at Silver End. The personal connection between Sir George Clausen and the Crittalls, as well as their shared beliefs in the importance of art and the welfare of the workforce, likely served as an impetus for their own collaborative project in the Old Iron Portraits. Sir George Clausen's own artistic career was marked by the exploration of Impressionism and rural naturalism, and much of his oeuvre was dedicated to capturing portrayals of English rural life and landscapes, and more specifically, rural work. He was elected as a full academician of the Royal Academy in 1906 and taught there as a professor of painting. Sir George had a large and close family, including youngest daughter Catherine, the artist behind our subject today, the portrait of I.M. Coope. Archival records indicated that George and Catherine had a close personal and professional relationship for much of their lives. Catherine is mentioned in much of the correspondence held in the Sir George Clausen Papers archives at the Royal Academy, and some of the correspondence in that collection of papers is addressed to her rather than her father. Records also noted that Catherine worked as Sir George's assistant during his execution of the St. Stephen's murals at the Houses of Parliament during the years 1925 to 1927, also the years of the Old Iron Commission. Catherine's shared work with her father in those years is likely what connected her to the Old Iron Project, though she, like many of the Old Iron artists, had studied at the Royal College of Art in the early days of her artistic practice. While a student, Catherine won several prizes for painting and drawing and continued her personal artistic career beyond her schooling, including a commission as an illustrator for the children's book Nancy in the Wood. Catherine, known as Kitty amongst her family, specialized in watercolor paintings and developed a sensitive, impressionistic style not dissimilar to her father's. She married Irish writer and mariner Conor O'Brien in 1928, and the two traveled together extensively aboard their yacht, the Saoirse, prior to Catherine's death in 1936, compiling joint writings and illustrations of their adventures. Turning now to the subject of Catherine's portrait, I.M. Coope, Irma Coope, likely pictured here amongst her co-workers in London in an issue of the company-produced magazine, The Open Window. Miss Coope was employed as a PA to the director of the Crittall Company and was a member of the company's London office location, which relocated to the premises of 210 High Holborn Street in 1925. Miss Coope is one of only 5 women depicted in the series. The portrait of Miss Coope is also one of the few of the series that depicts a location specific to Crittall and highlights elements of the architecture, including the Art Deco-style ironwork railing of 210's facade, in the painted background, firmly placing the subject of the portrait in her office at the High Holborn location. The building at 210 is still in existence today, coincidentally not far from the current location of the Courtauld Studios at Somerset House. The building across the street also remains, which additionally features in Catherine Clausen's background composition of I.M. Coope. With that background, I will now turn to the painting's condition and the issues that necessitated its conservation treatment. Here I've included a progression of the painting before and after the conclusion of that treatment, including an earlier snapshot taken by the Braintree Museum in 2005 of the painting's deteriorating condition, as well as a technical photograph of the painting's state as it arrived to the Courtauld in 2022. The portrait captures the sitter in half-length and quarter profile, seated at her desk with a telephone and typewriter in front of a large set of windows. A limited but vibrant palette was used to create the scene in a painterly, expressive style, highlighting the effect of the light against the sitter's profile. Large, visible brushstrokes, evidence of wet and wet paint mixing, and a minimal number of layers in the buildup give the impression of a quick and decisive technique, offering the possibility that the painting was executed alla prima, from life. The painting was executed in oil medium on a commercially primed linen canvas. The portrait was brought to the Courtauld from Braintree for treatment due to active paint flaking and associated extensive paint losses over much of the picture plane. The painting had been given an emergency facing during a collections audit in 2019 to address this issue, which is a temporary treatment measure wherein a reversible adhesive is used to attach a layer of support, typically a paper tissue, to the face of a painting when there is a risk of handling exacerbating known instabilities. The painting arrived to the Courtauld with this facing in place, which from audit records was applied using Japanese tissue and a carboxymethylcellulose adhesive. Initial examination following the painting's arrival revealed that, unfortunately, in addition to the extent of the flaking phenomena, this facing measure had begun to fail, with the paper detaching from the surface of the canvas in several large areas, and in many cases, taking flakes of paint with it. Initial scrutiny of the paint surface that I could access showed that areas of loss had revealed a white-colored lower layer with a powdery or sand-like appearance, as well as what appeared to be bare canvas tops. The paint layer itself appeared on the whole extremely thin and highly brittle, with extensive fracturing and instances of micro-tenting, where the fractured edges of paint had partially detached or formed minuscule pockets of cleavage. A halo effect of powdering of the lower layer was also observed along the tacking margins, following the exact edge of the applied paint over the exposed commercial priming. Microscopy of the surface revealed the extremity of the fracturing and detachment, showing that in many cases the flaking sections of paint were often broken up into small flakes measuring less than 10 micrometers in width. It was clear that the paint system was extremely and actively fragile, and the risk of further paint loss was high. Other condition issues noted at this early stage of treatment was the presence of large planar deformations in the canvas support, the presence of an opaque and yellowed varnish layer, heavy dark surface soiling on both the front and back surfaces, and a water stain on the reverse of the canvas, indicating that the painting was likely exposed to a high moisture event at least once in its history. I began my treatment with a technical investigation into the flaking phenomena to determine where in the layer structure the point of failure was occurring and what materials might be involved, which would enable me to plan the treatment measures accordingly. This included procuring samples of paint, priming, and support media for the creation of cross-sections, which could be evaluated in both microscopic and elemental analysis. Cross-section samples of detached flakes of paint, the top two examples on this slide, showed a thin paint structure of 1 or 2 layers that included the presence of a characteristic sparkling fluorescence and UV light indicative of containing zinc white pigment, as well as a crumbling white material on the underside surface of the detached paint. A sample taken from the edge of the prime canvas on the reverse, the bottom example on this slide, showed a natural fiber fabric support primed with 2 distinct layers. The crumbling white layer on the reverse of the detached paint flakes exhibited a broken up, sandy morphology in microscopy, indicating this material to be the likely point of failure in the system due to a breakdown in the cohesiveness of this layer's components. Performing additional tests on these cross-sections provided insight into the materials involved in the structure of the painting. These included dye staining tests, which indicated the presence of a protein-containing sizing layer below an oil-bound double priming. SEM elemental analysis, which is a technique that uses electron beam technology to identify inorganic materials present in microscopic samples, was conducted on both detached paint flakes and the primed canvas sample, and revealed the sandy deteriorating layer to be the uppermost priming layer, which contained titanium white pigment amongst its materials. Collating the knowledge gained from all these techniques built an understanding of the full layer structure of the painting, which I've illustrated here, including a linen fiber canvas prepared with a protein-based hot sizing, such as a rabbit skin glue, an initial priming layer of chalk tinted with lead white, a thinly applied upper priming layer containing chalk, barium sulfate, and titanium white pigment, and minimal paint layers, many of which were composed of the pigment mixtures containing zinc white, topped off with a thin natural resin varnish. The analysis also indicated the flaking to be associated with a failure within the structure of the upper priming layer, namely a cohesive failure, and that this occurrence was possibly connected to an interaction between the materials of the paint media and the priming, as this priming remained intact on sections of the tacking margins that remained bare. Additionally, the flaking issues were observed to be more severe for specific passages of paint, potentially associated with the use of particular color mixtures or with the thinness of the paint application. These understandings of the nature of the issue at hand helped to refine my treatment approach, as all evidence to this stage indicated that the processes leading to the flaking effect were ubiquitous, rather than localized to the areas where loss and flaking were apparent at first glance. The material evidence and observations also allowed for the development of hypotheses towards the potential cause of the degradation at hand, specifically titanium white photocatalytic degradation and zinc soap formation. Titanium white is a semiconductor pigment, which allows it to function as a chemical catalyst in certain situations. In very, very simplified terms, apologies to any fellow chemists in the audience, the interaction of UV light with the titanium ions present in the pigment can cause a series of chemical reactions that leads to the breakdown of the binding media immediately surrounding the pigment particles within the paint film, breaking bonds and leading to the embrittlement and occasionally the dissolution of that paint film containing the pigment. Photocatalytic degradation of titanium white, which can present as chalking or powdering of media, is a well-documented phenomenon and is potentially associated with early production of titanium white pigment. 1927 would have been a very early use of titanium white in a commercially produced canvas priming, as the pigment was introduced to the European art market only between 1920 and 1924. The early anatase form of the pigment is highly chemically reactive, and issues surrounding its use as an art material arose soon after its introduction to the market. By the 1930s, many art manuals advised against its use, and the pigment did not gain popularity as the artist material we know it as today until a more chemically stable version, the rutile version, was synthesized. This historical context for the materials adds to our understanding of Catherine Clausen's studio practice and the unexpected pitfalls of the use of novel artistic materials that accompanied an increase in commercially available art supplies at the turn of the century. Zinc soap formation is another well-documented phenomena in paintings conservation, occurring as a reaction between the metal ions of the zinc white pigment and the free fatty acids in the binding media, such as linseed oil, to create chemical compounds known as metal soaps. The formation of these structures can lead to aggregates large enough to be visible in the paint film to the naked eye, forming protrusions, and often causes embrittlement of the paint system they form within, as the preferential bonds of the soap compound formation necessitates the breaking of the original bonds of the components formed within the film. Again, very simplified chemistry there. Interestingly, these structures are also noted to sometimes form along material interfaces, which can lead to adhesion issues and subsequent delamination and flaking between the interfacing layers. High environmental humidity levels are also known to exacerbate the formation of soaps, which, given the observation of the water stain on the reverse of the IM Coope canvas, provides insight into the possible role of the object's physical history in its degradation. Additionally, zinc also acts as a semiconductor, which may explain the interactive effect observed between the paint and the priming, with the zinc-containing paint possibly exacerbating the reactivity of the titanium ions in the ground layer below. The water stain on the verso of the canvas was noted to match exactly to the shape and size of an area of loss on the front, adding support to the zinc soap hypothesis. Additional instances of flaking and staining were also noted in the 2019's collection audit of the other old iron pictures in the Braintree collection, though luckily none to the level observed with IM Coope, which provides additional context for the potential shared physical history of this portrait set after their exhibition in the Village Hall and before they entered the collection at the Braintree Museum. I was able to perform additional FTIR analysis, another chemical identification technique, of one paint sample with the zinc soap hypothesis in mind, which did indicate the potential presence of zinc soap compounds at several points in the structure of both the paint and priming. Other non-invasive analytical techniques I was able to perform prior to treatment included OSIRIS infrared imaging, which revealed the presence of very sparse carbon-containing underdrawing in the form of a compositional grid beneath the paint layers, as well as the presence of sketched lines in the sitter's collar. The sketched lines were found to be on the surface of the painting, on top of the paint, seen here on the right, though possibly still original. The lack of extensive underdrawing and the very minimal evidence for compositional change or layering, aside from a minute shift noted in the artist's signature, seen here on the left, provide additional support for the notion that the painting was executed quickly, potentially in one setting, and in the presence of the subject. Now that I had an idea of what was occurring to cause the observed degradation and the materials at play, I was able to turn to treatment in earnest. The goals of treatment were twofold, beginning with a structural campaign to stabilize the friable paint structure and prevent further paint losses, followed by an aesthetic campaign to address the previous losses to the image, with a design to reintegrate those areas and restore legibility to the composition. The structural campaign would namely center on consolidation, a conservation treatment measure which reintroduces or bolsters adhesive or cohesive strength to the structure of degrading media through the addition of an adhesive. The first and main consideration for the structural treatment were towards the choice of consolidant and the method of introduction, for which I conducted a good deal of research and, of course, empirical testing, running a slew of adhesives through material tests to understand how their individual properties could be applied to the system and manipulated, as well as their compatibility to one another for the potential of combined approaches. These material tests were conducted on samples, test paintings, and ultimately the painting itself before being undertaken at scale. In the case of IM Coope, the proposed treatment to address the paint flaking and priming degradation was complicated by the presence of the previously applied facing, which impeded clear access to the paint surface while providing the benefit of holding the friable paint in place, some of which was now structurally attached to the facing paper and detached fully from the canvas. Ultimately, a method was developed for a combined approach to initial consolidation and facing removal, with the introduction of the adhesive through the facing tissue, utilizing the facing to my advantage to hold the flakes against their corresponding location on the canvas while the adhesive was added, followed by a secondary step to remove the facing tissue after the initial consolidation was completed. This procedure required the chosen adhesive to be responsive to the complexities of the task in factors of penetration, adhesive strength, and resolubility, such that the facing tissue and surface residues could be removed at a later time. For this stage, the consolidant chosen was Aquasol, a synthetic adhesive which can be prepared in an aqueous, water-based solution. Aquasol has the benefit of continued solubility in both water and polar solvents, which was a key factor in the success of this stage, as it allowed the reactivation of the adhesive for tissue removal in the second stage. This resolubility also provided the ability to reposition and redistribute any paint flakes disrupted from their proper location on the canvas during the process of the facing removal, an example of which you can see here on the right. The initial consolidation and facing removal was an extremely painstaking and time-consuming process, given the extreme friability of the paint media, occupying a full year of my treatment time with this painting in the studio. This stage and the practical knowledge gained for the behavior of the paint media in response to treatment and the nature of the issues at hand solidified the treatment decision that further consolidative measures would be required from this point and would necessitate the execution of an all-over impregnation consolidation, where an adhesive could be introduced to the full structure of the painting and not only localized to areas of loss or visible damage. Once the facing was removed completely, it was clear, due to the extreme friability of the paint structure, that the remainder of the structural treatment from this point would need to be executed with the painting remaining flat, face up, and unweighted until full consolidation could be achieved, a state which is not often the case when performing intensive structural repairs. This is indeed how the painting remained through the removal of the canvas from the stretcher support, which was required to achieve full access to all areas of the painting for the impregnation consolidation. This occurred slowly over the course of many days, wherein the tacking edges were released and gently relaxed with the addition of small amounts of moisture and pressure from weights, introduced in a variety of creative ways given the limitations on movement. Ultimately, the canvas was flat enough for a board support to be slipped between the canvas and the stretcher, and then lifted away. This process also revealed an extensive amount of dirt and debris that had been trapped behind the stretcher bar members, which included dried plant material and a rusted bobby pin, which had contributed to those planar deformations originally observed in the canvas. At this point, the painting was loomed, a temporary measure wherein reversible adhesive was used to attach fabric strips to the furthest edges of the canvas, and those strips then attached to a fixed loom structure, enabling the addition of tension and support to the original canvas during the remainder of the structural work. The removal from the stretcher and the looming also enabled the painting to remain flat and face up, but access to the reverse to be enabled by positioning the loom over a gap between two supporting tables, allowing for surface cleaning of the underside of the canvas, which removed a large degree of dirt and debris from the backside surface. The looming also allowed for the use of tools previously inaccessible, such as a Mitka table. This table provides the ability to introduce localized heat and suction to the underside of a surface, which can improve the penetration and efficacy of an applied adhesive during consolidation, amongst other applications. With the painting loomed, I was then able to conduct a second round of localized consolidation using this table in all areas of loss or with access cracks in anticipation of the upcoming impregnation stage. It was here that I switched adhesives to a Biva 371 gel dilution, which would also be the adhesive used for the impregnation. The Biva solution was chosen following a series of tests for compatibility with the system, including the Aquasol adhesive that had already been introduced, essentially replacing the Aquasol without disrupting the initial hold the Aquasol consolidation had achieved due to the two adhesives' differing solubilities in solvents. This secondary localized consolidation also ensured the practical efficacy of the Biva dilution chosen for the upcoming impregnation in terms of the structure and needs of the painting. Following this second localized consolidation, the painting was secure enough for more interventive handling, including the ability for the painting to be placed upright for short periods of time. This was also the first time I had been able to engage with the painting upright since its arrival to the studios over a year previously. So this was a very gratifying stage of treatment. Preparations for the impregnation consolidation could then commence, which included finalizing the structure of the proposed vacuum envelope for the procedure. This was created from a drilled PVC piping frame hooked up to a suction vacuum. The frame would be placed around the painting and within layered plastic sheets to provide a vacuum seal around the object. The impregnation was planned to be conducted by applying warmed Viva gel to the back of the canvas in the area corresponding to the picture plane, before placing the painting face up inside the vacuum envelope on a preheated hot table. And I have here an illustration of a cross-section of that setup. The vacuum envelope was chosen to ensure that the applied adhesive was forced to travel up and through the paint structure from the back surface, while the painting remained face up and the paint surface visible. The heat of the table would ensure the Viva remained in a flux state as it was forced to move through the full structure of the painting, accessing the degraded priming layer at all points and reintroducing cohesive strength to the system. The impregnation was conducted as planned and was successful. After a few short minutes under vacuum, the clear Viva solution was observed seeping up through the cracks in the paint film to the paint surface, indicating the success of the penetration of the Viva adhesive through the full structure of the painting and in all areas of the composition. Unfortunately, despite the success of the impregnation, the procedure did not alleviate all of the textural issues on the painting surface caused by the flaking and tenting, and had the undesired side effect of producing new tenting in areas of previously blind cleavage as the adhesive moved through the system. Though this development added a complication, unforeseen in all testing prior to the procedure, such as the nature of practical treatment versus theoretical planning, but it was ultimately correctable. To address and correct the textural issues, a final consolidation was performed, localized to the areas of tenting, using the addition of the original Aquasol adhesive solution along with heat and pressure from a hot spatula. This brought the total consolidation measures for the structural treatment of the painting to 4 separate campaigns, which I've illustrated here. First, the initial localized Aquasol consolidation, both before and after facing tissue removal, a localized Viva solution consolidation with the help of the Mitka table, the Viva impregnation procedure, and finally a localized Aquasol consolidation specifically to correct and secure the areas of tenting and lift. Here on the right, I also have a generalized table illustrating the material compatibility of the 2 consolidants on which I based many of my choices for the treatment design and execution. The ability to affect these consolidants together via their shared thermoplasticity and activation temperature, as well as their solubility to polar solvents, and the ability to affect them separately in their different solubilities in response to water and hydrocarbon solvents, were the essential factors in the successes of each stage of treatment. Here as well, I have an illustration of the separate consolidation campaigns as applied to the composition of the painting surface, showing the difference between the localized versus impregnation campaign. The reactivity of the painting, both historically and in treatment, possibly pointing to the ongoing movement of the canvas, also solidified my decision at this point to perform a global lining for the painting, wherein a secondary fabric support is adhered to the reverse of the original canvas to provide additional stability against fluctuation. This was performed on the hot table in the week following the impregnation with the use of sailcloth and Viva gel adhesive. This lining was done with the knowledge that the stiffness and stability of a lining towards any mechanical and environmental fluctuations would benefit the longevity of the consolidation achieved to this point, which was the most important phase of this treatment. After the lining, the painting was deemed fully structurally stable, and the aesthetic phase of the treatment could commence. Beginning with the removal of the adhesive residues from the consolidation measures, in addition to the degraded historic varnish, from the surface of the painting using solvents. Here are the UV photographs of the painting both before and after the surface cleaning and removal of that degraded varnish. Now, those of you familiar with UV photography of paintings can likely attest that they do not often appear like blacklight paintings from the 1970s. In this instance, the high fluorescence levels observed in Miss Coope are emanating from the paint media itself due to the intrinsic fluorescence of the zinc oxide pigment the artist has used in most of her color mixtures. As a contrast, you can note the darker passages in the face, which appear slightly darker in the after cleaning image due to the removal of the fluorescing varnish layer from the surface, which results from areas where the artist has reworked the composition using paint that did not contain zinc white, which accounts for the difference. Next stages of treatment involved restretching the painting onto the original auxiliary stretcher support and the application of an isolating varnish layer. Next, a chalk-based fill material was used to add areas of the composition where the nature of the losses would benefit from textural improvement prior to retouching in order to accomplish full visual reintegration. So this is where the complications of the presenting damage led to complexities in my decision-making for the aesthetic treatment of the painting. To break down in a rough explanation for my approach to both the ethical and practical issues, I was able to separate the composition into 3 zones: foreground, the sitter and her desk; midground, the wall and the railing; and the background, the cityscape beyond the windows. Each of these zones featured varying degrees of loss, ranging from slight in the foreground to the complete loss of certain compositional shapes in the background. This range was put against the goals for treatment and the development of the treatment rationale, considered against several practical limitations for the execution of that treatment, and held in light of the benefit of archival evidence for the original appearance of the painting, which included the photograph of the painting from the Old Iron catalog taken the year it was finished, as well as an earlier photograph from the Braintree collection, which showed several intact areas that had since been lost. I used these archival references to create digital mock-ups that would create a map of the missing sections of the composition and what originally filled those spaces in terms of form and relative sizing. Additionally, I procured visual references for the architecture of the buildings from photographs and repeat visits to the site. I did try in vain to gain access to 210 High Holborn to acquire an accurate live reference from Miss Coope's office window, but sadly the company that currently occupies that floor of the building was unresponsive to my requests. As this is one of the few of the Old Iron Portrait series with a location-specific background that is emblematic to the history of the Crittall Company, I decided it was an appropriate choice to attempt some level of visual reintegration of the background, despite the extreme level of damage in those areas. For this, I developed a proposal for the retouching approach that would be a 2-part selective strategy, wherein the areas with the smaller degree of loss in the foreground and midground could be executed in an in-painting technique referred to as mimetic or invisible retouching, wherein areas of loss are fully visually integrated and the damage is masked. In contrast, I decided to approach the large degree of loss in the background using what is referred to as a visible or differential retouching, wherein losses are addressed to a degree enough to reduce the visual impact of the missing sections, while also allowing the damage and restoration to remain identifiable in viewing. This approach was selected in deference to both the ethical and practical considerations for reintegrating these extensive lacuna caused by the painting's history of degradation. The goal was to achieve aesthetic improvement while maintaining a comfortable and appropriate middle ground, both ethically and practically, for addressing an object with this level of damage. Additionally, in the background, part of the decision-making towards a visible technique was the decision not to add fill material to the background area losses, as this would allow the texture of the area to communicate the presence of the damage even as the color and compositional outlines were restored. Here is a progression of how I built up the retouching campaign in the background with a constant reference to the archival images and other visual resources. And here's a detailed example of that visible retouching approach. For this, I used small, stippled brushwork to create zones of color in the shape of compositional forms surrounding the islands of original existing paint, without fully connecting individual brushstrokes of retouching and leaving a proportion of the bare exposed priming surface visible. To contrast that technique of approach, here is an example of a mimetically or invisibly inpainted loss from the sitter's sleeve. Here is the full result of the aesthetic campaign achieved before and after retouching. And here is a comparison to the archival image of the painting from the Old Iron Portrait catalog. On the whole, I believe the results of both the structural and aesthetic campaigns for this treatment to have been highly successful, and I'm incredibly pleased that the painting has returned to the Braintree Museum and to the collection of the surviving Old Iron Portraits in both a stable and displayable state. Conservators Graham Barraclaw and Matthew Thompson of the Courtauld Gallery were also kind enough to construct a new frame to house the work, created in a period-appropriate style, which allowed the addition of UV blocking glazing and an inset backing, both of which provide additional measures of environmental and physical protection for the painting, helping to ensure the longevity of the current stability and appearance for many years to come. I'd like to thank all of my professors at the Courtauld for their indispensable role in the Miss Coope treatment and their continued support, to the current and former members of the Braintree District Museum team, to the Courtauld Research Forum's Painting Pairs project, for which much of the original research for the study was conducted, including my partner for the project, Chloe Glass, the staff of the Royal Academy Archives, and the member of the Clausen family and that contributed to my research, as well as Graham Barraclaw and Matthew Thompson for their design and execution of the I Am Coope frame, Nicole Ryder for her research assistance, and to all my fellow Courtauld students, current and previous, who contributed to and supported my work during my time there. I have here as well a select bibliography from the research, which I would be happy to forward to anyone interested in learning more about the subjects we have discussed today.